I used to think silence was kindness. In the early days, when the sirens never stopped and every hallway smelled like chemicals and fear, I believed my job was to keep people calm, even if the truth was bleeding through the walls. I told myself that numbers were just numbers, that withholding a few, a dozen, 100, was a form of mercy, a pause in the panic, a prayer folded into paperwork. But silence has weight. It gathers, slowly, like dust on a bedside table, like breath on the inside of a mask. The first time I refused to record a death, I felt the world tilt, only slightly, like a chair leg uneven on tile. The second time, I felt nothing. By the 10th, I couldn't meet my own eyes in the metal of the supply cabinet. And then the families came. Soft voices at first, then sharper. They described faces I had seen, not in the ward, but in my dreams, where they asked me why I erased them. Some nights, before throwing my mask into the bin, I wrote their names on it and prayed no one would ever look inside. I used to start every shift the same way, left glove first, then right, a small superstition I never admitted to anyone. The corridor outside the changing room was always cold in the mornings, even in Spain, even in a hospital that never slept. Maybe it was the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the heat of bodies, machines, and fear. Or maybe it was just the world holding its breath before the next collapse. My name doesn't matter yet. During those months, none of us had names, only assignments, rotations, and exhaustion. But I can tell you this, I was the kind of nurse who corrected the angle of an IV pole even when no one was watching. I memorized the rhythms of each patient's breathing the way a musician memorizes a song. Details were my religion. Accuracy was my pride. Or it used to be, before everything blurred into the same dull shade of panic. I believed order could save lives. I believed paperwork mattered because it honored the truth of what happened in those rooms. That was the culture I grew up with. Spanish households where mothers ironed tablecloths for guests who might never arrive. Where truth was sacred unless it caused unnecessary pain. Por tu bien, my mother would say, smoothing a lie into something soft. For your own good. I never imagined how much damage those 3 words could do. The first wave hit like a fist. Every day felt like a countdown with no promise of 0. People came in gasping, pleading, clutching at the last scraps of breath, and we worked until our hands cracked and bled under the gloves. It wasn't heroic, it was mechanical. Survival had a rhythm, and we marched to it, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. My role wasn't glamorous. I wasn't the doctor announcing miracles or the technician wrestling with ventilators. I was the one scribbling numbers, oxygen levels, heart rates, admissions, deaths. My station was a metal desk wedged between 2 supply closets, where I updated the daily report every evening. In normal times, it was a simple task. During the pandemic, it felt like holding a mirror to a burning house. I'd sit there in my PPE, mask digging into my cheeks, trying to ignore the muffled screams or the lullabies nurses whispered to dying strangers. Outside my little corner, reality raged. Inside it, I was supposed to reduce lives to symbols. Arrows up, arrows down, zeros, ones. That's the part people forget. Someone has to count the dying, and someone has to decide what gets counted. I didn't start by erasing anything. I need you to understand that. At first, I was just trying to keep up. The numbers were multiplying faster than the software could handle. The tables kept crashing, and the phone kept ringing, and the administrators kept demanding updates they could bring to the press. Numbers became weapons. Numbers caused riots. Numbers shaped fear. One night, our head nurse, a woman with eyes as sharp as broken glass, leaned over my desk. Her voice was quiet, tired. "If today's total goes out as is, they'll panic. We can't afford chaos right now. Just round down a little." She didn't say erase. She didn't say lie. She didn't say protect the government or protect the hospital or protect our careers. She said protect them. Protect the people. The request was small, almost invisible, a tiny subtraction, a numerical sigh. And I obeyed because I was exhausted, because I trusted her, because the whole country felt like a cathedral filled with candles burning too fast. That was the first fracture. Outside the hospital, Spain was living two parallel realities. The official one shown on screens, and the private one whispered in kitchens. Inside the wards, we bridged both, guardians of hope, witnesses of despair. Our culture values community above all else. That's what I told myself. Community first, panic second. So yes, I rounded down, just once, just by a little. But the thing about bending truth is that the first time feels like flexibility. The second time feels like duty. The third time feels like certainty, as if you're the only one brave enough to make the hard decisions. I didn't realize then that every softened number was carving something out of me, a small slice of conscience, a small piece of truth. I would go home after each shift and sit in the dark, too tired to cry, too wired to sleep. My mask lines stayed on my face until morning. Sometimes I imagined them as scars, invisible to others, but burning under the skin. Spain was clapping from balconies every evening, songs echoing between apartment blocks, people banging pots in gratitude, lights flickering as symbols of hope. Hope. What a dangerous word. I watched those celebrations from my window and felt like a ghost. They were cheering for us, but they didn't know what we were doing, what I was doing, that I had started adjusting reality the way you adjust a patient's pillow, gently, carefully, with the impression that comfort matters more than truth. I didn't see it as temptation, not yet, but every system has its first crack, its first tremor, its first moment where the ground shifts beneath your feet. Mine happened with a signature, a second signature, then a line of digits missing from a report that no one questioned. If anything, they thanked me for my efficiency. And that, quietly, invisibly, was when the real story began. People think temptation arrives like a storm, loud, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. But for me, it started like humidity, a slow, invisible weight clinging to everything, soft at first, then suffocating. The week after I rounded down that first report, the hospital felt even heavier. The air was thicker, the alarms sharper, the bodies more fragile. Spain was unraveling outside our walls, news anchors choking on statistics, ministers contradicting each other, families begging for beds that didn't exist. Inside, we lived by a different clock. Time wasn't minutes, it was oxygen saturation, drip speeds, ventilator availability. It was the number of times you disinfected your hands until the skin peeled. In that world, truth wasn't a principle, it was a luxury. The first time I saw the head nurse again after the request, she didn't say anything. No thanks, no questions, just a nod, a brief, knowing gesture that said, "We understand each other." That nod was the real beginning, because once someone acknowledges a secret, the secret begins to grow roots. It didn't take long for the administrators to notice my efficiency. My reports were clean, concise, easy to present. They were less alarming than the raw data coming from other wards. So they began filtering all their requests through me. Can you make sure today's numbers are formatted like last week's? Can you verify the totals? They need to show stability. Ministerio wants clearer trends, trying to make the curve less erratic. Less erratic. That was the phrase that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. When you hear it once, you think it's about clarity. When you hear it twice, you think it's about communication. By the 10th time, you realize what it really means. Make things look better than they are. I'd stare at the computer screen, the glow bleaching my eyes, and feel the room tighten around me. The numbers flickered, asking to be interpreted. Lives condensed into digits, panic distilled into graphs. Every change I made felt like touching a fragile wound. Was it wrong? Was it mercy? Was it survival? Spain was a country raised on stories of quiet endurance. My grandmother lived through the dictatorship. She used to say, "Sometimes silence is the only thing that keeps a family alive." I didn't know how much that sentence would haunt me. The real temptation came the night I altered more than a rounding error. We had a cluster of deaths in the geriatric wing, patients who deteriorated faster than expected. 5 died in a single night. 5 souls, 5 stories, 5 families who would never get to say goodbye. If I added those 5 to the official report, it would spike the curve, a sharp, undeniable jump. Administrators hated spikes. Spikes created panic. Panic created unrest. Unrest created blame. I knew what they expected without being told. I sat at my desk, hands trembling inside my gloves. The hallway behind me echoed with hurried footsteps, metal trays clattering, muffled sobs from families calling in. The software window blinked. Daily mortality 12. Mortality pending +5. 12 felt manageable. 17 felt catastrophic. I hovered over the keyboard. 12, 17. 12? The cursor pulsed at me, tiny, rhythmic, hypnotic, like a heartbeat. Then I did it. I deleted the 5. The moment my finger lifted from the key, the world didn't end. No alarms, no judgment, just silence. A terrifying, permissive silence. That silence became addictive. No one talks about it, but the ability to alter reality, even a small piece of it, is intoxicating. I told myself I was preventing chaos. I told myself the government needed time. I told myself the press would sensationalize the numbers anyway. But beneath all that justification was something darker, something I didn't want to admit. I liked being essential. Not in the heroic way everyone clapped for, but in the quiet way, the way where my decisions shaped the narrative of a nation. There's a power in holding information that others fear to touch, a power in deciding what the world sees. Every day after that, the administrators came to me with gentler voices, softer requests. "We trust your judgment. You understand the balance we need. You decide what's appropriate." And I believed them. I believed I was the one holding the line between order and chaos. But temptation has a price, and the first sign of that price was the dreams. The faces began appearing at night, not the way they looked in life, but the way they looked when they died. Eyes half open, mouths relaxed in that eerie stillness that never leaves you once you've seen it. But in the dreams, they weren't accusing me. They were asking me, "Why didn't you write me down? Why did you pretend I wasn't here? Why did you erase me?" I'd wake up sweating, the imprint of the mask still carved into my skin. My apartment felt too small, too close. The silence too loud. During the day, I'd watch the staff wheel the dead to the morgue, white sheets covering frail outlines, and I'd feel something shift inside me. A heaviness, a dull ache, but not enough to stop. Temptation rarely stops on its own. It evolves. Then came the call from a higher office, someone from the regional health board, a voice too calm for someone asking about death. "We noticed your reports show more stability than other centers. Good work. If you can maintain that consistency, it will help the region immensely." Maintain consistency, not accuracy, not integrity. Consistency. He didn't need to say the rest. I heard it anyway. Make us look like we're in control. After that call, my changes became bolder. A 22 became a 17. A spike became a plateau. A discrepancy became a formatting adjustment. And every time, the administrators looked relieved. Their relief felt like approval. Approval felt like justification. Spain is a country built on coexistence with grief. We host funerals like communal rituals. We mourn in loud voices, with open doors, with shared food and shared tears. But during the pandemic, grief became private, sterile, hidden behind plastic barriers. Maybe that's why hiding the numbers felt, at first, like protecting a cultural instinct. We weren't meant to face loss alone. We weren't meant to witness it in statistics. So I convinced myself I was preserving dignity. The Spanish virtue of compassion twisted into the temptation of concealment. I didn't see it clearly then, but the moral math was flawed. You can't protect people from grief by lying about its scale. You only delay the avalanche. The lure of control grew stronger. I started noticing how colleagues would come to me for answers. Is it really getting better? Are we stabilizing? Are we actually turning the curve? And I'd smile, a mask-covered smile, but a smile nonetheless, and say, yes. Slowly, but yes. They believed me because they needed hope. I believed myself because it was easier. But the truth was that I had become the gatekeeper of hope. And that role, it changes a person. Hope becomes currency, one you can manipulate. I wasn't doing it for money. I wasn't doing it for fame. I wasn't doing it for career advancement. I was doing it because it made me feel indispensable, because it made me feel like the chaos needed me. Pride dressed as duty, the most dangerous kind. It happened with a family. A middle-aged woman called the hospital screaming, begging to know if her father had survived the night. I knew the answer. He hadn't. But his death wasn't in the official system yet. There was a delay in processing. If I confirmed it verbally, the numbers would create a spike later that I would be pressured to hide. So I told her, "We're still checking. Please wait." She cried, thanked me, called me an angel. I hung up and felt sick. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just altering numbers, I was altering lives. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. Sweat pooled at the edges of my mask. My eyes looked older, sharper, wrong. That was the moment temptation changed form. It was no longer about preventing panic. It was no longer about supporting the hospital. It was about me, my fear, my guilt, my desire to maintain control over a truth I was afraid to face. After that, everything became routine. I'd review the raw numbers. I'd calculate what was acceptable. I'd adjust accordingly. I'd deliver the report with a calm, professional tone. People praised me for my composure. Composure isn't courage. It's just numbness wearing a clean uniform. My colleagues were breaking, crying in supply closets, collapsing from exhaustion, yelling into the void, and there I was, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who made the reality easier to swallow. But inside, something was rotting. It grew with every deleted line, every softened entry. Every time I whispered to myself, "It doesn't matter. It's only numbers." But numbers are names. Numbers are faces. Numbers are people who lived and died and deserved to be seen. I had forgotten that. Or maybe I had chosen not to remember. The dreams worsened. The faces multiplied. They began naming themselves before I woke up. I'd rip off my mask at the end of each shift, breath flooding out like guilt escaping my lungs. Sometimes I'd scribble a name on the inside of it, shaking, then throw it away before anyone saw. It was my only form of honesty, a private ritual of remembrance for people I had made invisible. Temptation had done its work. It had taken my virtue and stretched it into something unrecognizable. It had turned my sense of duty into an instrument of denial, and it had left me blind to the consequences barreling toward me. Because temptation always feels righteous, right until the moment it breaks you. And my breaking point was closer than I realized. The night everything tipped, the hospital felt like a furnace. Heat rising from machines, heat rising from bodies, heat rising from guilt. There was a moment, small, barely a breath, when I realized I no longer hesitated before altering the numbers. My fingers moved before my mind did. My judgment sharpened into something swift, instinctive, dangerous. That was the first sign of indulgence. Not pleasure, not satisfaction, but a kind of release, a way of letting the world bend because I was too tired to hold it upright. It was late, past midnight, the hour when fluorescent light feels like a punishment. A resident rushed past me, gown streaked with sweat, eyes rimmed red. Someone coded in room 12. Someone else gasped for air in room 9. A young man screamed that he didn't want to die, and all I felt was nothing. A cold, flat nothing. I opened the reporting software. Numbers swam in front of me. Deaths, admissions, overflows. I adjusted them in silence. A 19 became a 14. A 7 became a 3. A spike flattened like dough under my palms. My mask felt too tight, my heartbeat too slow. For the first time, I didn't care if it was wrong. I cared only that it made the world look calmer. Every corner echoed with the sounds of collapse. Patients gasping, ventilators hissing, monitors shrieking like wounded birds. But I drifted through the chaos untouched, like a ghost moving through a nightmare it had memorized. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I had become efficient, swift, detached. Administrators trusted me completely now. Doctors deferred to my interpretation of the reports. Journalists asked for explanations through official channels I had quietly shaped. I had power, a hidden, pulsing power, and I used it, easily, smoothly, like a reflex. That's indulgence. Not pleasure, but surrender. It started when a teenage girl died alone, holding a stuffed animal. She was the kind of patient who smiled even when her skin was gray. The kind who thanked us after every blood draw. The kind who shouldn't have been there at all. When she died, I updated the log. Her name appeared on the screen, and just as quickly, I removed it. Not officially, not maliciously, just delayed it. Because the numbers that day were already too high. Because the administrators had already warned me about destabilizing patterns. When I took off my mask in the break room, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip a pen. I wrote her name inside the mask, quickly, small letters, a secret prayer. Then I crushed the mask in my fist and threw it away. I told myself it was respect, but deep down, I knew it was desperation. The last flicker of conscience trying to stay alive inside me. The morgue overflowed. They wheeled the deceased into a refrigerated truck parked behind the hospital. I shouldn't have seen it, but I did. Rows of bags stacked like forgotten luggage. I stood there, frozen, breath fogging the inside of my mask, as orderlies arranged the dead like inventory. Every bag had a tag. Every tag had a name. Names I recognized. Names I had erased. Names I had softened into silence. And instead of breaking, something inside me hardened. A single thought took over. If I don't control this story, someone else will. Control. That was the real temptation. Not compassion, not fear. Control. There was a small storage closet behind my desk, unused back then, full of old files and expired equipment. I turned it into my sanctuary. Every break, I'd slip inside, close the door, lock it, and breathe. The adrenaline in those minutes was intoxicating. The world outside was chaos, but inside that tiny room, I held the narrative in my hands. I kept a notebook hidden behind a crate of saline. In it, I wrote the real numbers, the truth, unfiltered, uneased. The notebook felt like contraband, a forbidden indulgence. I told myself it was for future accountability. But if I'm honest, it was proof. Proof that I still had the courage to face the truth somewhere, even if in secret. Proof that my conscience wasn't fully dead. Proof that I hadn't become what I feared. At least, not yet. Altering the reports became faster, cleaner. My hand no longer trembled. My decisions no longer weighed anything. There was a thrill in it, a sharp, metallic thrill, like biting your lip until it bleeds, like holding your breath longer than you should, like walking a bridge at night and leaning just a little too far over the edge, the thrill of almost falling. I would look at a row of numbers and feel something electric in my spine. One keystroke, one deletion, one shift, the entire story changed. The entire country breathed differently because of me. And that, I admit now, was intoxicating. The kind of intoxication that eats at you from the inside. One night, a junior nurse hovered over my shoulder. She leaned in, too close, too curious. "Why are the records different from what the night team reported?" she asked. My pulse exploded. Every instinct screamed. Every muscle tensed. I smiled, a slow, practiced smile, and said, "Because those were preliminary. I'm finalizing the correct totals now." She hesitated, looked again at the screen. I angled my body, blocking her view. A small, subtle move, but she noticed. I could tell. And in that moment, I felt something dark unfurl in my chest. A silent warning, a cold, instinctive defense. I needed to protect the system, protect the silence, protect myself. She walked away, confused. I stayed there, gripping the edge of the desk, breath ragged behind my mask. That's when I realized how far I'd fallen. Temptation wasn't something pulling me downward. It was something I was actively gripping on the way down. Dreams flooded in, violent and vivid. Faces pressed against glass, hands reaching, mouths moving without sound. Sometimes I heard them. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they screamed. Other nights, I dreamed I was counting them, one by one, and every time I reached for a name, it dissolved into static. I stopped sleeping altogether, 3 hours a night at most. Coffee became a meal. Adrenaline became air. And through it all, I worked with surgical calm. No tremors, no doubts, just motion, action, indulgence. The indulgence of pretending I could carry the weight of truth and still remain whole. There's a point where you can't tell if you're doing something to protect others or to protect yourself. I crossed that point without noticing. I told myself, it's mercy, it's compassion, it's stability, it's necessary. But what I meant was, it's easier, it's quieter, it's mine to control. It keeps me from falling apart. That's the moment indulgence becomes decay. When it stops being a choice and stops being a refuge. The last indulgent act, the one that would lead directly to the collapse, happened almost casually. A cluster outbreak in a quiet neighborhood. 8 deaths in a day. The raw numbers screamed disaster. The curve would explode. The media would swarm. I stared at the screen. 8. 8. My finger hovered. If I reported them, truth would win. If I hid them, silence would win. I pressed delete. The thrill was instant, electric, corrosive. I told myself I was saving the community from fear, but every part of me knew the truth. I had finally given in fully, completely, irrevocably. There was no virtue left, only indulgence. Indulgence in the power of silence. Indulgence in the lie of control. Indulgence in believing I alone could decide what the world deserved to know. And the collapse, my collapse, began that same night. A slow, trembling unraveling I could no longer ignore. The night the collapse began, nothing extraordinary happened. No alarms, no screams, no sudden disaster. Just a silence that felt wrong. Too clean, too sharp. Like the moment before glass shatters. I sat at my desk, staring at the numbers I had just altered. 8 deaths erased. A whole neighborhood's grief folded into nothing. My hands were steady. My breath was calm. But inside, something slipped. Something small. Something final. Around 3 a.m., they wheeled in an elderly man from the emergency room. He arrived too late, too breathless, too broken. I recognized the name on his bracelet, because an hour earlier, I had deleted it from the nightly totals. I watched orderlies move him to the holding area. His arm dangled from the stretcher, his fingers curled loosely, as if reaching for something he had dropped. I thought I was numb. I thought I had no feeling left to lose. But then I felt it. A drop. A hollow, sinking drop. Like stepping onto a stair that isn't there. My chest tightened. Suddenly, every breath felt counterfeit. I walked out to clear my head. The corridor was empty except for the humming vents and a mop bucket someone had abandoned. The walls looked too white, too clean. And then, a sound. Soft, persistent. A woman sobbing into her phone. I didn't recognize her at first. She wasn't a patient. She wasn't staff. Family member. She turned, eyes swollen, voice shaking. "Please," she whispered, "please tell me, is my father still alive? They're not giving me answers." My throat closed. Her father. The man I just watched being wheeled away. The man I had erased from the system hours earlier. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She stepped closer, desperate. "Please, I just need to know. I felt the hallway tilt. A buzzing rose in my ears, and I lied. He's being monitored. Her knees buckled with relief. Relief built on my silence. Relief built on my sin. When she thanked me, I almost vomited. At dawn, I was summoned. 3 administrators, a secretary, a closed door. Their faces were tight, exhausted, hungry for control. "You've been stabilizing the reports well," one of them said. "We need similar consistency today. The minister is holding a press briefing." I stared at them, blank, hollow. They interpreted my silence as agreement. "Good," they said. "We're counting on you." Counting on me. To hide the count. I nodded because I couldn't trust myself to speak. When I left the room, the world felt warped, like a corridor shot through a funhouse mirror. Morning shift, bright lights, burnt coffee. The junior nurse approached again, the one who had almost seen the truth. "Hey," she said gently, "are you okay? You look pale." I wasn't pale. I was dissolving. She reached for the clipboard in my hands. "I can help with the morning totals." "No." The word shot out like a blade. She froze. I tried to soften it. Smile. Say something normal. But the smile didn't come. The words didn't come. Just a tight, choking sound. She backed away, confused and scared. I couldn't blame her. I was scared too. During a break, I went to the hidden closet, closed the door, sat on the floor. My latest mask, damp from breath, streaked with fatigue, lay in my lap. I wrote a name inside it, a name I had erased, then another and another. Soon the mask was full, black ink bleeding into white fabric. When I finished, I held it to my chest, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not the silent kind, not the tired kind, the collapsing kind. The kind that rips something out of you and leaves it trembling on the floor. I cried until my breath broke, until my mask was soaked, until I couldn't feel my hands. When I threw the mask away, it felt like throwing away a confession. That afternoon, I opened the software to prepare the evening report. The numbers filled the screen. Death counts, ICU saturation, pending certificates. They blurred, shifted, multiplied. I blinked hard, but the numbers wouldn't stop moving. Row after row, they rearranged themselves into names. Names I knew, names I deleted, names I dreamed about. My heart raced so fast I could hear it pounding in my mask. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. News travels fast in hospitals. Grief travels faster. By early evening, families began arriving at the entrance, desperate, confused, pleading for updates the hospital couldn't give. One woman insisted she had been told her father was being monitored. The lie. My lie. Alive in her mouth. Another family had paperwork that didn't match the public totals. More lies. More fractures. A man slammed his fists against the wall. A daughter fell to her knees sobbing. An elderly woman prayed into her hands. And all of them looked at me like I was someone who had answers, someone who could help, someone they could trust. I felt something inside me cave in. I staggered into the nearest corridor, heartbeat hammering, hands shaking. The walls pulsed. The lights flickered. I couldn't breathe. Every breath was a gasp. Every gasp was a confession trying to escape. A colleague found me. Hey, breathe. Sit down. What's happening?" What was happening? Everything. Nothing. Too much. I think something's wrong," I managed. She guided me to the floor, held my shoulders, told me to inhale. But every inhale hurt. Every inhale felt like pulling shards into my lungs. When she asked, "What's wrong?" I almost told her. Almost. But fear sealed my mouth shut. Fear and pride, and the instinct to protect the silence. That night, I returned to my desk. The administrators wanted the totals within the hour. The screen glowed in the darkness, lines waiting to be altered, but I couldn't touch them. My hands hovered. My fingers curled. I felt the weight of every lie pressing down on me, every erased person, every manipulated report, every mask scribbled with a name. The silence I had protected became a scream inside me. My chest tightened until I thought a rib might crack, and for the first time, I couldn't move. Not a finger, not a breath. The numbers stared back at me, unchanged, raw, real, and something cracked open. A voice echoed behind me, soft, certain. Why are the numbers wrong? I froze, turned, and saw a family member. One who had slipped past security, one holding a printout, one with tears cutting down her face. "My father is dead," she whispered. "You knew. You knew. Why didn't you tell me?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came. No excuse, no lie, no protection, just a shaking breath. She took a step closer. "Why did you erase him?" Her voice broke. "So tell me, how many others did you erase?" The hallway spun. My knees buckled. My mask filled with heat and breath and panic. Everything I had built, the stories, the lies, the control, cracked under the weight of that question. And then I collapsed. Right there, in front of her, in front of everyone. A heap of silence finally caving in. Blackness rushed in like water. When I woke up, the ceiling was different. Not the stained grid above my desk. Not the flickering lights of the corridor. White, smooth, too bright. For a moment, I thought I was in another ward, another room, another life. Then I turned my head, felt the tug of an IV in my arm, and saw the hospital gown. My own hospital gown. I had become the patient. A monitor beeped softly beside me. Someone had drawn the curtain halfway, as if to give me privacy and still keep me visible. A compromise, like everything else. My throat was dry. My lips tasted of paper. My body felt heavy, as if gravity had thickened overnight. And then it came back. Not all at once, but in pieces. The woman with the printout, her father's name. Her question, "How many others did you erase?" The hallway spinning. The floor rising up to meet me. My shame arrived before my memory fully did. A knock at the door, then the curtain parted. It was my head nurse, the one who'd first told me to round down. Her eyes were tired, but behind the exhaustion there was something else now, something sharper, more careful. She didn't look at me like a colleague anymore. She looked at me like a problem. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I couldn't tell if she meant physically or morally. Both felt wrecked. "Tired," I said. It was the only word that made sense. She nodded, stood in silence for a moment, arms folded, lips pressed thin. "There was an incident," she said finally. "You fainted." Fainted. Such a clean word for what had happened. "I collapsed," I corrected, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't argue. "There's been concern," she continued. "You've been under a lot of pressure. The administration thinks some time off will help." Concern. Time off. Gentle words padded around a sharp idea. "We need you out of the way." I swallowed. "And the reports?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked, the way we look at a patient whose prognosis we already know but haven't said aloud. "There are some discrepancies," she said. Discrepancies. Another gentle word. "An internal review is being opened," she added. "They'll probably want to talk to you." Every syllable tightened around my chest like a cord. I looked away, toward the small window above the bed. The sky outside was the color of wet stone. "Is that all?" I asked. She hesitated. No clipboard, no pen, just her and me and the unsaid things between us. "You're a good nurse," she said quietly. Something inside me flinched. No, I thought, not anymore. But I didn't say it out loud. She left. The curtain fell back into place, a thin fabric border between me and the world. One more veil, one more layer of silence. Later, alone in that hospital bed, I turned the words over in my head. Concern, discrepancies, review. They circled like vultures, but beneath all the institutional language, one question moved in like an unwelcome guest and sat on my chest. What, exactly, are you going to say? Not to them, to yourself. For months I had narrated my choices in soothing phrases. For stability, for calm, for the greater good. Lies, wrapped in noble vocabulary. Here, in the bed, stripped of my uniform, stripped of my authority, I finally had no one left to convince, no administrators to reassure, no colleagues to comfort, no public to protect, just me. Me and the truth that I had erased deaths, that I had lied to families, that I had turned suffering into statistics and then bent those statistics to satisfy a fear bigger than my conscience. The monitor beside me beeped steadily, as if mocking the way I had measured other people's lives. For the first time, I formed the sentence in my mind without any defense. I betrayed them. The words sat there, heavy, bare, and something shifted. They discharged me home after a day. Officially, exhaustion, stress reaction. Unofficially, a nurse who had become inconvenient. I walked out through the same entrance where families had begged for answers. This time, I was the one looking away. Barcelona, or Madrid, or whichever Spanish city you imagine, outside the hospital was changed but still itself. Bars with chairs stacked. Old men in masks walking slowly. A woman on a balcony banging a pot, half-hearted now, like the applause had grown tired too. I moved through streets that smelled of disinfectant and bread, of fear and resilience. This is the part of Spain they never put in the statistics. The woman who leaves a Tupperware of croquettes at her neighbor's door. The teenager who plays guitar quietly in a courtyard. The church that leaves its doors open, even when it's almost empty. I walked past one such church. I hadn't entered one in years, not really. I had grown up Catholic in that cultural way, processions, candles, holy cards tucked into wallets. Confession was something my grandmother believed in. I believed in hard work and accuracy. Accuracy. I almost laughed. The doors were open, the interior dim. A few candles flickering like trembling breaths. My feet turned in without asking my permission. There was no priest in the confessional booth, just the worn wood, the little grate, the seat where countless people had whispered their secrets in darkness. I sat in the pew instead, middle row, alone. The silence was different from the hospitals, less sharp, less clinical. Here, silence felt listening. A statue of Mary watched from the side, hands open. I stared at them and thought of all the hands I had seen, clutching bed rails, reaching for relatives on phone screens, going limp under sheets. I tried to pray. Nothing came. Words like forgive and repent felt too large, too polished, too distant from the rawness of what I'd done. So I did the only thing I could. I told the story. Not out loud, not in some neat, linear confession, just in pieces, between breaths. I saw myself at the desk, the first rounded-down number. I saw the administrators, their stability requests. I saw the erased deaths, the notebook in the hidden closet, the names inside the discarded masks. I saw the woman in the corridor, asking if her father was alive. And I saw myself lying. Tears blurred the wooden pew in front of me. I pressed my forehead against my clasped hands, not in piety, but to keep myself from coming apart. The church didn't judge. It didn't absolve either. It just held the sound of my breathing. For the first time, I realized I wasn't seeking forgiveness yet. I was seeking the courage to stop lying, not just to others, but to myself. When I got home, my apartment felt smaller than ever. The shadows were heavier. The bed looked like a place for interrogations, not rest. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Part of me wanted to throw it against the wall. On the third ring, I answered. Hello? There was a pause, then a familiar voice, raw around the edges. This is the daughter of Jose Morales. You spoke to me at the hospital. My mouth went dry. Her father, the man I had watched being wheeled to the morgue. My heart thudded. I forced myself to answer. Yes, I said softly. I remember. I got your number from a nurse, she said. She said you collapsed. I shouldn't have confronted you like that. No, I interrupted, the word catching on a breath. You were right to. Silence. Long. Heavy. Can I ask you something? She said finally. I leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers digging into the cold edge. Yes. Did my father die alone? Her voice cracked on the last word. I closed my eyes. Images surfaced. A hand on a rail. A nurse stroking a forehead. A priest on a video call, offering remote last rites. No, I said. He didn't die alone. My voice trembled, but the words were true. Completely true. The first clean truth I had spoken to a family in months. She sobbed, quietly, almost with relief. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to know. We stayed on the line, breathing. I felt something unclench in my chest. She didn't ask me if I had erased him. She didn't ask me about the numbers. She didn't know yet. But I did. And keeping that to myself now felt unbearable. Listen, I said, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. There's something I need to tell you. Not just about your father, about others. My hand shook around the phone. I realized in that moment that this was the true confessional. Not the booth, not the church. This. A thin line connecting two people, carrying words that could not be unsaid. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I told her this. That day, I should have told you the truth sooner. I delayed. I hid behind the system. I'm sorry. It felt small compared to what I'd done, but it was a beginning. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. I thought I hated you, she admitted. In that moment at the hospital, I thought you were the enemy. But my father, he believed in you, in nurses, in people like you. He kept telling us they're doing what they can. Her voice softened. If you made mistakes, she said slowly, you'll have to live with them. But I don't think you were trying to hurt us. I think you were drowning, same as us. The words didn't absolve me. They didn't erase the lies, but they did something else. They gave me permission to stop pretending I was invincible, to admit I had drowned too. After we hung up, I sat on the floor, back against the fridge, and realized. Confession isn't a single act. It's a series of choices to stop protecting the parts of yourself that are already killing you. The next day, I went back to the hospital, not to work, not in uniform. In plain clothes, mask on, heart pounding. I signed in at the front desk. Security looked at me with curiosity, but no one stopped me. I moved through the corridors like a ghost retracing its steps. My desk was occupied by someone else now, a relief nurse focused on a screen. She barely glanced up. I went straight to the storage closet. Same door, same handle, same hesitation. I opened it. The smell hit me first. Dust, antiseptic, the faint lingering trace of latex powder. My notebook was still there, wedged behind the crate of saline, exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up. It felt heavier than I remembered. Every page contained numbers, names, dates, the real statistics, the shadow ledger of everything I had altered. My hands shook as I flipped through it. This wasn't just a record. It was evidence. Evidence of my guilt. Evidence of a larger lie. Evidence that could blow the silence open. I slid the notebook into my bag. For the first time, I was choosing transparency over protection. But the fear that came with it was enormous. What would happen if I brought this forward? Would they call me a whistleblower? A traitor? A criminal? All three, maybe. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down like a hand on the back of my neck. And then I remembered the daughter's question, did my father die alone? No one had ever asked, did the statistics reflect his life? It was time someone did. That afternoon, I sat at my small kitchen table, the notebook open in front of me, a pen in my hand, my phone beside it. I wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. This is what really happened. The words looked fragile, but they were a start. I thought of going to the press. I thought of going to the health board. I thought of going to a lawyer. But before any of that, I knew where I had to go first. To the families. To the people whose loved ones had become discrepancies. To the ones who had the right to hear the truth from the person who had buried it. My heart raced at the thought. I was terrified of their rage, terrified of their grief, terrified of seeing, in their eyes, the mirror image of my own cowardice. But I was more terrified of staying silent, because now I understood. The real punishment wasn't what they might do to me, it was who I had already become. I picked up my phone, scrolled to the hospital directory, found the number for patient relations. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was the line, the threshold between confession as private guilt and confession as public act, between regret and responsibility. I took a breath, another. Then I pressed call. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. A voice answered. "Hospital liaison, how can I help you?" I opened my mouth, and this time I didn't plan to lie. When the hospital liaison answered, my voice didn't come out in a steady stream of righteousness or clarity. It cracked, it trembled, it hesitated on every syllable. "I need to speak to the families," I said. "Not the administration, not the press, not the people who wanted a clean narrative. The families." There was a pause on the other end, then a soft, cautious reply. "About what?" "About the records," I whispered. "About the numbers. About what I changed." The line went quiet, not hostile, not shocked, just listening. "We can arrange a meeting," the liaison finally said, "if you're certain." I was certain. Terrified, but certain. A small part of me expected the world to explode the moment I admitted it aloud. Alarms blaring, police knocking at my door, headlines erupting with my name. But nothing happened. No sirens, no uproar. Just a single human voice acknowledging my request. "Come tomorrow morning," she said. "We'll gather whoever wants to speak to you." Tomorrow. A day I couldn't prepare for, no matter how many times I rehearsed my apologies in the dark. The next morning, I walked into a conference room filled with chairs, spaced apart, masks on each seat, bottles of hand gel lined up like little soldiers. A few families had already arrived. Others joined slowly, silently. No one clapped. No one thanked me for coming. No one smiled. Good, they shouldn't. I stood at the front with my notebook tucked under my arm, not as a shield, but as a truth I could no longer hide. The liaison introduced me with neutral phrases. Wants to speak. Clarifications. Addresses concerns. Then she stepped aside, and I faced them. The daughter of Jose Morales was there, sitting with her hands clasped, eyes already swollen. She didn't look angry. She looked ready. They all did. I opened the notebook. The room exhaled. "I won't waste your time," I began. My voice was small but steady. I changed reports. I altered numbers. I delayed information. I softened data that should have been hard. A murmur rippled through the room. Not outrage, but a collective wounded recognition. I told myself I was protecting the public from panic, I continued. But what I was really doing was hiding. From fear, from grief, from responsibility. An older man inhaled sharply. A young woman pressed a hand to her mouth. I pressed on. You deserved the truth. Your loved ones deserved to be counted, fully, honestly, and without delay. My throat tightened. I'm sorry. The words fell into the room like stones into deep water. No echoes, no applause, just depth. A woman stood. She held a photograph, her mother, smiling in a sunlit garden. Did you erase her name? Her voice wasn't raised. She wasn't attacking me. She was asking, simply, painfully. I swallowed. Yes. Her shoulders shuddered, but she didn't scream. She didn't curse. She sat down again, holding the photograph as if it were breathing. Another stood. Did you erase my brother? Yes. Did you erase my wife? Yes. Each yes carved a deeper wound in the room and in me. But each yes also released a weight, not from them, but from the silence I had been carrying like a stone strapped to my ribs. With every acknowledgement, something inside me loosened, not healed, but unknotted. Confession isn't repair. It's opening the wound so it can finally breathe. After the questions tapered, after the tears softened into quiet breathing, the daughter of Jose Morales stood. She didn't ask me anything. She simply said, "Thank you for telling the truth now." A few heads nodded, not forgiving, not absolving, just recognizing that truth, late as it was, mattered. The liaison ended the meeting. Families drifted out, carrying grief that would outlive statistics. One older woman approached me on her way out. She touched my elbow gently. "My husband died scared," she said, "but he didn't die alone. You were there. That matters too." I felt something inside me crack open, not painfully, but strangely, quietly. A place in me had room again for breath. I didn't return to my old desk. That wasn't my place anymore. But I walked through the hospital halls, slower this time, not as a worker, not as a savior, just as someone who needed to see the truth without altering it. The junior nurse, the one who had suspected something, saw me from across the corridor. She didn't look away. She didn't approach. She simply nodded. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. Recognition. Not approval, not condemnation. Just, "I see you." And for the first time in months, I felt seen in a way that didn't terrify me. I didn't keep the notebook. I scanned the pages, sent them, anonymously at first, to an independent review board, then later under my name. Not to destroy the hospital, not to expose individuals, but to let truth exist again, unedited. I burned the physical notebook afterward, not as erasure, as release. The ashes curled like the edges of the masks I used to write names on. Except this time, nothing was thrown away. Nothing was hidden. The truth had its place. I didn't return to nursing right away. Maybe I never will in the same way. But I return to the hospital sometimes. I sit in the courtyard, watch the nurses walk by, tired but whole. Watch families wait with hope, fear, trembling hands. I listen to the living, to the dead, to myself. Return isn't going back to the person you were. Return is facing who you became, then choosing, quietly, deliberately, not to be that person again. I'm not pure. I'm not redeemed. I'm not healed. But I am honest. And in a world built on silence and statistics, sometimes honesty is the only kind of redemption we get. There is a moment every morning, just before the city wakes, just before the first tram rattles through the street, when Spain feels like it belongs to the ghosts. The ones we counted, the ones we didn't, the ones we lost quietly, behind plastic curtains and humming machines. The ones whose stories drift between our buildings like unspoken prayers. Now, when I wake, I leave the window open. The air feels different than it did during the pandemic. Lighter, almost forgiving. But memory stays. It lingers like the faint scent of disinfectant in a clean room. I sit with my coffee. No alarms, no charts, no numbers demanding to be shaped. Just breath, just silence, but not the kind that hides anything anymore. They fixed the reporting system, added cross-checks, new protocols, more transparency. The administrators avoid me gently, like I carry a delicate truth they're afraid to break. But the nurses, the ones who lived through the same fire, they stop to talk. Not about the past, not about the investigation. They talk about the small things. A patient who made them laugh, a shift that didn't drown them, a sunset they managed to glimpse through a window. Life returning. Not dramatically, just steadily. Some write to me, not to condemn, not to absolve, just to say, I remember my mother today, or my brother loved guitars, or my father used to whistle while he cooked. They send fragments, memories, pieces of lives I once reduced to digits. I keep their messages in a folder, not hidden, not secret, a reminder of the truth I almost erased. People are not numbers. People are not trends. People are not curves on a graph. They are stories, and stories deserve to be carried, not managed. One day, weeks after the meetings, a package arrived at my door. Inside, a white cloth mask, clean, unused, and a small note. For the names you won't hide anymore. J.M.'s daughter. I held it for a long time. The mask wasn't asking for pen or confession. It wasn't a burden. It was an invitation to breathe without running, to face without collapsing, to carry without erasing. I hung it on a hook by the door, my own reminder that truth belongs outside the closet, outside the notebooks, outside the silence. Some mornings I walk past the hospital and simply count. Not deaths, not admissions, people. A nurse handing a sandwich to a colleague, a janitor humming to himself, a patient waving at someone through the glass. Lives, not numbers. This count is honest. This count never lies. And in that quiet, unremarkable arithmetic, I finally understand something. Redemption is not a single act. It is a practice. Not loud, not heroic, just steady, human, real. At night, when the city softens into shadows, I sometimes whisper the names I remember, not to confess, not to mourn, but to keep them alive in the only way I can, as voices not erased, not hidden, not forgotten. The silence I once used to bury the truth is now the silence I use to protect it. And that, quietly, humbly, is enough.